Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Gland Bodybuilding Mountain. And today I thought I'd make a video on 7 things, 7, that may be preventing you as a natural bodybuilder from getting good results. And of course, this list is not exhaustive. There's always other reasons, but I thought these 7 reasons are often overlooked. So I thought I'd just draw some attention to it to see if there's some resonance with what's going on with you and your training, or maybe there's something else that you want to pay attention to that maybe has gone under the radar. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, because it's what you don't know that gets you, not what you do know most of the time. It's like, I don't know what's in this forest back here. That's probably what's going to get me. So reason number 1, that a lot of natural bodybuilders stop getting results. And this is something that is a funny little trap, because when you first start training, you hear about progressive overload and you hear about heavier weight is better, because when you use heavier weight, the muscle should get bigger to compensate, and therefore you get caught in this endless cycle of chasing heavy weight. So what happened to me back in the day was that I was bench pressing, and I was always trying to bench press heavier, and sometimes I'd be like, hey, I got to use heavier weight, even if it means going into excessively low rep ranges, so that way I can properly, fully stimulate the muscle. But what started to happen was when I started to use super heavy weight, like in the 4 rep range or 3 rep range all the time, what happened was my strength started to go down. I started to actually regress in my strength, even if I took extra days off. And the way that I remedied this was that I started to use high rep range days in between the heavy workouts, and then miraculously my strength started to come back up again. So you see, what happens is if you overtrain, especially with the heavyweights, and you use them too much, best case scenario is you get a bit weaker. Worst case scenario is you end up getting a career-ending injury because your body just cannot recover. And the joints and connective tissue also cannot recover because of the overwhelming beating they take from the heavy weight. So one way to ensure that you'll continue getting results is to notice that if you're hitting a wall, especially if you're using heavy weight all the time, then to back off on the weight a bit and increase the reps for a workout or 2, or start to change up the rep ranges regularly. And you'll notice that you start to access other muscle fibers and perhaps bust through that strength plateau. So yeah, it's not about always using one rep range, especially when you're using super heavy rep ranges and you're hitting failure in 3 or 4 reps. That can overtrain you really quickly and injure you. And honestly, I never go into the 4 rep range anymore. I never use that rep range. The heaviest I use is 6 to 8 reps in a set, but for the most part, I'm usually 8 reps to 20 reps. That's really my sweet spot for heavy compound lifts. Now, reason number 2 why some natural bodybuilders might not be getting the results that they could, and I do feel that this is stemming from the social media age, where people are always posting progress pics, or they're making videos like I'm making right now, and they feel the pressure to always be in shape because they're always a minute or 2 away from another photo shoot, right? Whereas back in the 80s and 90s, bodybuilders would get ready for a competition season for a few months, and then that's when they would do all their photo shoots and all of their media sort of things, and then they would go into training mode, which is basically nourishing the body and making sure that they're taking in enough food in order to grow muscle, but cutting was not their primary priority. So I ran into a guy recently in the gym, and he looks great and everything, but he's kind of stuck in that mindset of being in a perpetual cut to make sure he's always losing fat and always in premium condition. And of course, when you're in premium condition, especially down to 5 or 6% body fat, for most people, that's going to be a very hard level of conditioning to maintain while nourishing the muscles properly in order to put on muscle. So one of the things you can do to offset this is to eat a lot of food, and if you notice that you're putting on body fat, you start refining some of your choices. Perhaps you cut some of the fat down and replace that with protein, or cut some of the carbohydrates down and replace it with a bit more protein, and see what the body does. And if you start putting on fat, then yes, maybe you need to adjust some of these ratios, but at the same time, you're not worried that if you're sitting a few percent above what your contest conditioning is, that's really not your primary concern, or shouldn't be at least, if you want to put on muscle tissue. When you're trying to put on muscle tissue, nourishment should be the first foundational priority, and secondarily, you make sure that you're not nourishing the fat stores and you're nourishing the muscle stores more so, right? So that way you're putting on a bit of muscle, but you're not necessarily putting on the same ratio of fat, and then in the end, you're going to come out ahead. So yeah, I don't believe in bulking. I mean, as far as just gulping down boatloads of fat and boatloads of sugar and carbs and, you know, just having a reckless abandon sort of idea around your diet. But what I will say is that if you're trying to maintain 5% body fat at any cost, you are going to have a hard time putting on muscle mass over the long run and also recovering from your workouts. So that's one thing I have noticed that is happening, and that's really a social media driven sort of thing. So if you're doing this, this might prevent you from putting on a bit more muscle. Now, reason number 3, and this is something that I talked about before in a previous vlog, but not enough rest or no days off. So some people, you know, let's put it this way, if they're alpha-like people or if they're type A personality type people, they'll have a tendency to go 100% towards a goal, but they usually don't know where the off switch is. And the thing is with bodybuilding is that it's just as much recovery as it is stimulation. And if you never take any days off, there is a very strong tendency for overtraining. As much as some people like to say there's no such thing, there really is. You can burn out, you can raise up those cortisol levels, and it may feel like you're hitting a wall constantly every time you go into the gym because your body is fighting recovery. So remember, nourishment is also part of the recovery process. So when you are allowing your body to recover, that is a form of grounding that nourishment. And if you're in a perpetual training cycle where you're always training and never taking any time off, that can really harm you. And it's the same thing with sleep. I mean, most people will not be able to function on 4 or 5 hours sleep a night and then train and recover. As a natural bodybuilder, you're going to have to realize that sleep is when the majority of the recovery is going to be happening, and you'll definitely need at least 7 hours a night. If you're not sleeping or you're not taking any days off, you are always running the risk of burnout. But again, ignore anything I'm saying if you're still getting gains doing whatever it is you're doing. But at the same time, I have seen guys just burn out because they're too excited about bodybuilding, right? They're too excited about training. They love the training so much that they're always in the gym, and that can sometimes work against you. I usually recommend 1 to 2 days off a week. Some people need 3, but definitely at least 1 day off a week from training is a good idea. Now, reason number 4, I see some natural bodybuilders not getting as much results as they could. And this is going to be a controversial one because I know everybody's got misunderstandings around this one, right? And that is they spend more time overstretching their exercises rather than focusing on stimulating the overall system and the muscle bellies themselves. So one thing people have to understand is range of motion of the joint is different than range of motion of the majority of the muscles involved in a movement. So let me explain here before you get all mad, okay? If you're taking a movement all the way through the fullest range of motion, one could argue that there is an exponential amount of stress on the joints, right? This is the basis of jiu-jitsu, right? There's a point to where the joints get to a certain point where the muscles can no longer protect them anymore, and then we get the snapping sensation, such as we see in the UFC, right? So it's the same thing with certain exercises. There is a way of refining and strategically using tension to hit the most amount of muscles possible while keeping the least amount of wear and tear away from the joints, because the joints are already getting trained. They're already getting a beating no matter what. So one thing I will say is that if you're using excessive range of motion, a lot of times the tension has left the muscle and now the tension is just resting on the joint at the bottom. And that is definitely not going to stimulate your muscles effectively, but it will injure you or create some sort of inflammation in the joints over time. Now, each movement and each person is going to have different tolerances for that, but it is up to you to find that perfect range of motion where you're stimulating the muscles, where you're putting your body into an advantageous position to handle tension. So think of it this way, say you're gonna drag your buddy from a Sasquatch encounter and you're gonna drag his body out of the forest, right? How would you do it efficiently instead of finding the most awkward way possible to do it? And there's a good chance that that will have a bit more of a muscle gaining effect for you. It's kind of like jumping to slam dunk a basketball. You wouldn't squat ass to the grass to jump as high as you can to slam dunk a basketball, right? Because you wouldn't be able to manifest the same type of spring and torque in order to leap at that height. So one thing I've seen is that some people, they'll make a movement as awkward as possible, and then they can never handle decent weight. And then of course their body never gets that stimulation overall, such as putting heavy weight on the spine during squats or deadlifts. That's why rack deads are so effective for some people. They find that they get such an anabolic response. It's because they can put so much weight on the spine and therefore stimulate the entire system. And then therefore, when they do other movements, their body hormonally is functioning in a way that it basically creates an anabolic environment. So this is a factor that you have to take advantage of as a natural bodybuilder. And if you're always using such ludicrously light weights because you're using excessive stretch, you might be missing out on some gains. That's all I'm saying. Now, number 5, and this is something that happens to all of us. Sometimes we find a workout program that we really like. We find it's comfortable. We enjoy it. We go to the gym and we know what we're supposed to do. And you get familiar with all the movements and you get obsessed with going up in numbers such as rep ranges or weight, right? Because you have it all tallied in your head. You get so obsessed with winning that game that sometimes you forget that if you're stuck at a sticking point for a long period of time, at some point it might be a good idea to change what you're doing. Hit things from a different angle of attack, change up the program itself, maybe go from a 2-day split to 3-day split or vice versa. Maybe you need to change the rep ranges that you're using or the exercises altogether. And sometimes by doing this, you stumble across different muscle fibers that have not been accessed before, or at least not as effectively. And therefore, when you come back to the original workout program again, maybe months later, you may realize that you put on some strength or some strength endurance or some muscle mass because of the change. So don't be afraid to change your workout program if it has stopped working, especially if it stopped working for 6 months or 7 months and you've been just beating your head against a wall. Just for sanity reasons, change up the workout program and see if you make some new discoveries about what is working and what isn't for yourself. That's really what I'd recommend. So don't get too stuck in doing something because something worked in the past, because sometimes what worked in the past is not what's going to work right now. And you have to make some adjustments to accommodate that. Now, number 6 is something that is often overlooked by most natural bodybuilders. And as you get older, you probably will look at this a little bit more because sometimes the body will shout at you that something's going on. But nutritional deficiencies can play a huge role in you not getting the most out of your training. Now, this goes back to one of my previous reasons that some natural bodybuilders aren't getting results, right? They're on a perpetual cut, right? Well, cutting can create nutritional deficiencies over time because, of course, you're limiting the amount of food and the types of foods that you're bringing in. But nutritional deficiencies overall, especially like mineral deficiencies like iron or magnesium or iodine or calcium, like any of these things can make a massive difference in what's going on with your metabolism, what's going on with your energy levels, and also what's going on with your recovery. So if those things aren't in check, what's going to happen is you might be doing a workout program that worked for you for years, but it won't matter how perfect your workout program is, you are not going to experience the results because your body is crippled, right? At that point, it's crippled. It's basically going without something that is essential. So if you notice that your energy levels are down or if you're not recovering, take a look at these different factors. See a naturopathic doctor or Chinese medicine doctor or somebody that's in your area that specializes in this sort of thing. And they may be able to give you some sort of idea if something is going on in regards to your nutrition and maybe something that you're missing, right? Like years ago, I went magnesium deficient and I didn't even realize that my water supply was so full of chlorine that it was killing my ability to absorb magnesium. And once I fixed that issue and started supplementing some liquid magnesium, instantaneously all the symptoms went away. So these are things that aren't talked about a lot in the natural bodybuilding community, but they will make a massive difference in how you're responding in the gym. Now the last reason why some natural bodybuilders aren't getting the most results out of their workouts, and I don't know how common this is, but this does happen, is that there's not enough of a blend of isolation movements and compound movements. So what will happen is some natural bodybuilders will watch the performance enhanced bodybuilders, and those performance enhanced bodybuilders are using nothing but isolations and machines and different types of little tiny muscle movements, right? And they're getting these great big muscles, and the assumption that the natural bodybuilder will falsely make is that they can do that too and get the same results. Well, the truth is that compound movements and isolation movements and a nice blend of the two is a very good idea for most natural bodybuilders, because the compound movements are when you can stimulate the overall hormonal system through putting real weight on the body and stimulating a bunch of muscles at the same time during an exercise. And then when you see the body developing a certain way, and perhaps there's some weaknesses developing, then you can really spend some time isolating those muscles to also gain some sort of stimulation and results there. But if you just exclusively do isolations, you'll notice that you won't necessarily get that systemic effect that is so inherent in squatting, deadlifting, heavy bent over rows, you know, those types of movements. And there's a reason why these basics have usually been the foundation of bodybuilding in the old school era. So I'm not even saying you have to deadlift from the floor. I'm not even saying you have to squat ass to the grass. I'm just saying find ways that you can do whole body movements, and finding the way that works for you as well as keeps your joints in one piece is also important. But excluding these altogether because you can't squat all the way to the floor would be a mistake. I talked to a guy the other day, and he said he's not doing incline presses anymore with a barbell. And I said, well, why? He says, oh, because it hurts my shoulder when I come all the way down to touch my chest with the bar. I'm like, well, then don't come all the way down and touch your chest with the bar. And he's like, well, I don't know, it's just a habit, I have to do it. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, right? If something is harming you, then find a way to do it in a way that it doesn't harm you. And that will give you more results in the long run. And so this would be my bonus tip of why some natural bodybuilders don't get the results they want, is that they're too stubborn and they don't follow the messages from their body. They try to do things the way everybody else is doing them instead of honoring their own individuality. So what you have to do is follow what the body's telling you. If going down half an inch on bench press hurts your shoulders or hurts your pec tendons, then don't go down quite so low. You know, maybe go to where it doesn't hurt, and then see how you can train that way, right? So find ways to train, find ways to stimulate, but don't find ways to annihilate the joints in the process. And that will get you much farther in the long run, and you'll be training when you are as old as a mountain. So yeah, those are my tips for you. I mean, I don't know if they help or not. Maybe they do. I think they do. I hope this helps out in your training anyway. Thanks a lot for watching. If you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalgalantbodybuilding.com, and thanks to the Patreon supporters, and take care for now. Mountain.